Chapter 1. Colum Hunt was a legend in his small North Carolina town, but not in a good way. Famous for driving off substitute teachers with sarcastic remarks, he also specialized in annoying principals, hall and lunch ladies, guidance counselors who always started out wanting to help him. The poor boy's mom had died after all, wounded up, hoping he never darkened the doors of their offices again. There were nothing more embarrassing than not being able to come up with a snappy comeback with an angry 12-year-old. Colum's perpetual scowl, messy black hair, and suspicious gray eyes were well known to his neighbors. He liked to skateboard, although it had taken him a while to get the hang of it. Several cars still bore dings from some of his earlier attempts. He was often seen lurking outside the windows of the comic store, the arcade, and the video game store. Even the mayor knew him. It would have been hard to forget him after he snuck past the clerk at the local pet store during the May Day parade and taken a naked mole rat destined to be fed to a boa constrictor. He felt sorry for the blind and wrinkly creature that seemed unable to help itself, and in the name of fairness, he also released all the white mice who would have been next on the snake's dinner menu. He never expected the mice to run amok under the feet of the paraders, but mice aren't very smart. He also hadn't expected the onlookers to run from the mice, but people aren't too smart either. As Colum's father had explained after it was all over, it wasn't Col's fault that the parade had been ruined, but everyone, especially the mayor, acted like it was. On top of that, his father had made Colum give back the mole rat. Colum's father didn't approve of stealing. As far as he was concerned, it was almost as bad as magic. Colum fidgeted in the stiff chair in front of the principal's office, wondering if he'd be back at school tomorrow, and if anyone would miss him if he wasn't. Again and again he went over all the various ways he was supposed to mess up the Meg's test, ideally as spectacularly as possible. His dad had a list of options for failure again and again. Make your mind totally blank, or concentrate on something that's the opposite of what those monsters want. Or focus your mind on someone else's test instead of yours. Col rubbed his calf, which had been stiff and painful in class that morning. It was that way sometimes. The taller he grew, the more it seemed to hurt. At least the physical part of the Meg's test, whatever it was, would be easy to fail. Just down the hall, he could hear other kids in gym class, their sneakers squeaking on the shiny wood of the floor. Their voices rised as they shouted taunts at each other. He wished just once that he got to play. He might not have been as fast as the other kids or as able to keep his balance, but he was full of restless energy. He was exempt from a gym requirement because of his feet. Even in elementary school, when he tried to run or jump or climb at recess, one of the monitors would come over and remind him that he needed to slow down before he hurt himself. If he kept at this, they would make him come inside. as though a couple of bruises were the most awful thing that could happen to someone, as though his leg was going to get worse. Carl sighed and stared out through the glass doors of the school to where his father would be pulling up soon. He owned the kind of car you couldn't miss. A 1937 Rolls-Royce Platinum plated bright silver. Anybody else in town had anything like that? Nobody. Carl's father ran an antique store on Main Street called Now and Then. There was nothing he liked more than taking old broken things and make them look shiny and new. To keep the car running, he had to tinker with almost every weekend, and he constantly asked Carl to wash it and put some kind of weird old car wax on it to keep it from rusting. The Rolls-Royce, that needs to be talked to my brother about that, worked perfectly, unlike Carl. He looked down at his sneakers as he tapped his feet against the floor. When he was wearing jeans like this, you couldn't tell there was anything wrong with his leg, but you could sure tell the minute he stood up, started walking. He had surgery after surgery since he was a baby. All sorts of physical therapy, but nothing had really helped. He still walked with a slim, slidey limp, like he was trying to get his footing on a boat that was rolling from side to side. When he was younger, he sometimes played that he was a pirate, or even just a brave sailor with a peg leg, going down with a sinking ship after a long cannon fight. He played pirates and ninjas, cowboys and aliens, explorers, but not ever any game that involved magic. Never that. He heard the rumble of an engine and began to rise to his feet, only to return to the bench in annoyance. It wasn't his father, just an ordinary red Toyota. A moment later, Molly's, one of the other students in his grade, hurried past him as a teacher beside her. "Good luck at your ballet tryouts," Miss Carmel told her, and started back to her classroom. "Right, thanks," Kylie said, then looked over at Carl oddly as though she was evaluating him. Kylie never looked at Carl. That was one of her defining characteristics, along with her shining blonde hair and unicorn backpack. When they were in the halls together, her glaze slid past him like he was invisible. With an even weirder and more surprising half-wave, he headed out to the Toyota. He could see both her parents in the front seat looking nervous. She couldn't be going where he was, could she? She couldn't be going to the Iron Trials. But if she was... He pushed himself off the chair. If she was going, someone should warn her. Lots of kids think it's about being special, Carl's father had said, and the disgust in his voice evident. Their parents do too, especially in families where magical abilities dates back generations. In some families where the magic had mostly died out, seeing a magician child as hope for a return of power. But it's the children with no magical relatives you should pity most. They're the one who thinks it's going to be like it is in the movies. It's nothing like the movies. At that moment, Carl's dad pulled up to the school curb with squeal of brakes. effectively cutting off Carl's view of Kylie. Carl limped towards the door and outside, but by the time he made it to the Roy's, La Miley's Toyota was circling around the corner and out of sight. So much for warning her. Carl, his father, had gotten out of the car and was leaning against the passenger side door. His mop black hair and same tangly black hair Carl had was going gray at the sides. He wore a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches despite the heat. Carl often thought that his father looked like Sherlock Holmes in the old BBC show. Sometimes people seemed surprised he didn't speak with a British accent. Are you ready? Carl shrugged. How could you be ready for something that had the potential to mess up your whole life if you got it wrong? Or right, in this case, I guess so. His father pulled the door open. Good, get in. The inside of the Royce was spotless as the outside. Carl was not surprised to find his old pair of crutches thrown into the back seat. He hadn't needed them in years, not since he'd fallen off a jungle gym and twisted his the ankle on his good leg. As Callum's father slid into the car, called the engine, Carl pointed to them and asked, "What's with those? The worse off you look, the likelier they are to reject you," his father said grimly, glancing back behind him as they pulled out of the parking lot. That seems like cheating. Carl, people cheat to win. You can't cheat to lose. Carl rolled his eyes, letting his dad believe what he wanted. All Carl knew for sure was that there was no way he was going to use those crutches if he didn't have to. He didn't want to argue about it, though. Not today. When Carl's father had already uncharacteristically burned the toast at breakfast and snapped at Carl when he complained about having to go to school just to be removed at a couple hours later. Now, his father crouched over the wheel, jaw set and fingers of his right hand wrapped tightly around the gear shift, changing gears with effectual violence. Carl tried to focus his gaze on the trees outside, their leaves just starting to yellow, and to remember everything he knew about the magisterium. The first time his father had said anything about the masters and how they chose their apprentices, he'd sat Carl down in one of the big leather chairs in his study. Carl's elbow had been bandaged and his lips was split from a fight at school. He'd been in no mood for listening. Besides, his father had looked so serious, Carl had gotten scared. And that was the way his father spoke, too, as though he was going to tell Carl he had a terrible disease, and it turned out the sickness was a potential for magic.